And yes, it's working now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jorge, for this kind invitation. And I'm very excited about meeting all of you in Juris North. Yeah, I'm very interested in knowing more about the work that you guys are doing. And what I discussed with Jorge is like, I'm happy to today briefly explain one of the papers that I wrote discussing, as Jorge was saying, discussing a little bit of the how are we drafting laws and policy in order to achieve or in order to promote a sustainable use of groundwater. So that's the title of the presentation is Towards Sustainability in Groundwater Use, an exploration of key drivers motivating the adoption and implementation of law and policy. So that is a little bit what we did in this research. I wrote this paper with the supervisor of my PhD, and we published it in last year, 2019. So this is part of the research that I conducted while doing my PhD. And as I said, it was mainly focusing on these key drivers motivating the adoption and implementation of law and policy to promote sustainable use of groundwater. So briefly, what I would like to discuss, I told Jorge that I will be talking for around 20-25 minutes. So the main things that I want to discuss is sustainability. So how are we defining, and when I say we, I mean like scholars, like legal scholars and also scholars dealing with development studies, how all of us are trying to define sustainability and how can we measure, how can we adapt it, how can we foster sustainability. And then I will move to what is sustainability in groundwater use. How can we use groundwater resources in a sustainable way? Is that possible? How can we measure that? What are the laws saying about that? And which laws? Of course, there are many different laws. So when we try to frame this and try to make it a little bit more, to narrow a little bit this, as I said, the main question of what are the key drivers motivating the adoption and implementation of law to promote sustainability in groundwater use. We look at 4 different case studies and at 2 different countries. We looked at Australia and in Costa Rica. So we wanted to have also like developed countries and developing countries to have the different contexts, different policy development, stages of development of laws and different practices that people are doing because even though I'm focusing on the laws, we are also doing an examination on the ground on people practice, of people practices. So how are people really moving towards sustainable use in their daily lives? And then I will discuss the findings, and finally I will mention some of our main conclusions, as I said, coming from this paper. So, well, the first important thing to say about sustainability is like there is no universally agreed definition of the concept. So depends of who you talk to, you will have a definition. So I was discussing with Jorge this, so if you are talking to politicians, you will have one definition. If you talk to legal scholars, you will have another one. If you talk to political ecologists, you will have a different one. If you talk to anthropologists, so we don't have a definition on that. And another important thing is that we have many different views and ideas and perspectives on what sustainability is and how can be promoted, and also how it can be measured. So there are different kind of how can we measure it and how can we promote it and how can we actually move towards a more sustainable use, a more sustainable development, or a more sustainable use of natural resources. So maybe one thing that we have some kind of agreement is like this concept became popular after the World Commission on Environment and Development report, the Brunel report from 1987, which says that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But interesting enough is to say that, well, this definition again is very broad, and I think the first question will be, what do we mean by needs, right? Because we can have different needs and different people have different needs. So it can be that some people's needs are actually very, very unsustainable ways of using resources. So again, that is also a very interesting discussion that we can have. But just to move on, let's just remember that that is one of the definitions that everybody has agreed and is popular, and we use it a lot and we repeat it a lot. Of course, as I said, it's important to define a little bit more what do we mean, especially when we talk about needs. So talking about how do we define sustainable development, besides that definition, if we go, for example, to international law, the International Court of Justice has said in many different resolutions that when we talk about sustainable development, it's not really, there is no such a thing like a specific principle of international law, but rather we have to understand it as an ultimate goal or objective of human activities. So it's something that we should have present in every single activity that we do. And in that, I mean like individuals, but also with industries, with governments, and with all kind of activity that we do. So I guess one of the main things that we can say is like we still have a very important debate. The debate is still active and continues as to its normativity. So even though we have it, that is an idea and is a principle and is something that we should aim to do, the normativity is still very, okay, how can we implement this? How can we measure? That is still very debate. It continues to be a very debatable topic, as well as its critiques. So every time that we talk about sustainability, we will hear not just coming from, as I said, one is the legal definition of what can we do with this concept and have to measure and promote it, but also there's a lot of people, a lot of scholars that they also have said, okay, this concept is not adding anything to the discussion, and actually they are portraying that is in a pejorative, like in a negative sense. So many scholars have said, for example, that when we talk about sustainable development, we're just talking about a political or neoliberal capitalistic rhetoric used to legitimize the economic growth. So under the flag of sustainable development, it's very, very common to see many environmental disasters, that it can be like different kind of development, like infrastructure or like hotels, or even some kind of environmental disasters. Like they can say, okay, we're going to do this, even mining, okay, mining a sustainable way, that is like, okay, this is not really mining, or we are going to develop this, I don't know, urbanization in a sustainable way, but in the end, no, it's also, again, the houses are not built in a sustainable way, or some kind of, okay, we're doing this plantation, but we will do it also sustainably. But again, it's not really what is happening. So it's used to promote different kind of economic activities under sustainable development, while the truth is that they're just using this concept to legitimize economic growth. Then there are also many scholars that have criticized how the industry is using this concept just as a green mask to justify the continuous and ruthless exploitation of natural resources. So again, as I was saying, many projects in many different countries, you will see, okay, yeah, we are extracting this, I don't know, plantation, like tree plantations in a very sustainable way, when it's not the case. They're just destroying all the forests, or in the way that they are extracting water. They say, no, we are extracting in a sustainable way, while the only thing that they're doing is continuing the exploitation of natural resources. Another problem that some scholars have highlighted is the technological and political constraints, also that they are inherent in its implementation. So again, in order to have more sustainable development, a lot of times we need better technologies that they are more, it could be like greener technologies, or a more sustainable way of doing things. However, the technology is not really sustainable, and they are still extracting using any kind of technology that, again, is not providing any kind of environmental protection, of the political discourses that they say, okay, we are promoting environmental protection, and again, is something that it doesn't have any content, and it's just used in a very, very easy way. I don't know, it's like the flag of human rights. So they are just concepts that they have been promoted and used in many different environments, while they are not really having any content related to what the concept actually implies. And I think maybe one of the most important critiques, and at least I consider that, is when we discuss about sustainable development, and many people try to avoid, or they try to manipulate the use or the interconnection between sustainable development and other matters and other topics, for example, consumption, or taxes, or redistribution of wealth. So it's like, yeah, we have to do this sustainably, but then you say, okay, in order to do sustainable, we have to extract, I don't know, less fossil fuels. But then, no, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about doing these projects in a sustainable way. And as I said, just in the things that they are easy to be manipulated, but know when they don't want to engage in the discussions, but the discussions go beyond building or constructing or implementing different activities that they can be easier to put in under a sustainable development way, but not really engaging with the topics that they are really having problems with, as I say, consumption patterns, or redistribution of wealth, or even taxes, like who is getting how much money, and how can we, if we put that money towards this activity, we can also do it in a more sustainable way, because we will have more money to invest, as I said before, in better technologies to build whatever we need to build. So those are some of the critiques around the concept of sustainability. So I guess one of the important, also a very important thing to say about this concept is the extent to which sustainability can be legally constrained for the states is debatable, because yes, of course, it has been used in international, as I said, in international law at the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and also in many different countries. Many different civil societies, organizations, or different groups have tried to sue their government or industries, arguing that they are not doing economic activities in a sustainable, using a sustainable development framework. So of course we can legally constrain certain activities. However, the extent to which we can do that is still debatable, because again, we don't know exactly how to measure and how to say, okay, this activity is not sustainable. I guess it must be when it's like very obvious that we are like I don't know, in the face of an environmental destruction, that it will be very easy to win a case like that. However, in many different contexts, it has been very hard to prove or to define, okay, what is unsustainable development to get the states to be legally responsible for some kind of activities done in an unsustainable way. So important is to say that the ICJ has said that these norms, the new norms of standards in which we want to build this sustainable development, must be taken into consideration and given proper weight, both when contemplating new activities, but also activities begun in the past. So I think this is very important because this has also been understood as an international law principle, that when we talk about sustainability, it's not only from the activities that we are going to start building today, any economic activities, as I say, building any infrastructure or any houses or mining or plantations, all of that is not only the ones that we are starting today, but all the ones that we have started in the past, even if it's 50 years ago, we can still say, okay, now this kind of activity needs to take into consideration sustainable use or sustainability, using the resources in a sustainable way. So we can say that sustainability is a factor orienting the behavior of states and guiding the intention and the relevant rules in judicial processes. So that also has been kind of agreed. This is something that we can have in international law, saying that sustainability, we mean a behavior that these states have to, it has to guide all the activities and the ways that the states do all their new economic activities. So maybe just to sum up what I have said regarding sustainability, we have said that sustainability reflects a range of procedural and also substantive commitments. For example, obligation of sustainable use of natural resources in all kind of economic, industrial activities. Also, it's important to say that sustainability is inherent in the concept of sustainable development, that, as I said, it has been a popular concept since 1987. And overall, the sustainability provides a framework within which states are to reconcile economic growth with social needs and natural resources protection. So those are the three things. And when I was talking about the critiques, is most of these people that they have done these critiques is because they feel that when they talk about sustainable development or sustainability, the only focus has been the economic growth, and sometimes economic growth and social needs. However, we have left out of this discussion in many circumstances, in many moments, the protection of natural resources. Okay, now entering with what do I mean with sustainability in groundwater resources, and just to give a little bit more of, let's say a little bit more of explanation and how can we do sustainability, how can we move toward a sustainable use of groundwater resources. So just very briefly to say that when we talk about water, most people often will think about rivers or lakes. However, it's very important to say that 97% of all the water available for human consumption is coming from groundwater. So we need to focus particularly in groundwater. And why am I saying this? Because we have spent we have spent much more money and time, and we have conducted much more research in understanding how rivers and lakes work, and in protecting rivers and lakes, and trying to clean or reclaim this. However, we haven't done that, or we have done that much less when it comes to groundwater. So the nature and importance of groundwater continues to some extent poorly understood. So if you talk, for example, with hydrologists, they will tell you that we still need a lot of research, to conduct a lot of research to better understand how climate change is affecting, because when we have like, for example, extreme weather conditions like drought, and then we have like months of drought, how is that drought affecting the recharge capacity of the aquifers? That is something that we still need to understand better. So we are still, as I said, it is a resource that we need to put a little bit more attention to and try to understand it better. And also that comes with regulating better, because if you don't know how a resource behaves, of course, it will be even harder to regulate its use and its management and its protection. So threats to groundwater quality and quantity are quickly escalating due to many reasons, such as consumption patterns that I was mentioning before, also population growth, climate change, urbanization, deforestation, also poorly or inexistent wastewater treatment facilities. So many of that, we are just, in many places around the world, we have like only treating wastewater with septic tanks. And then in many places, they're putting the septic tanks just next to the aquifers or next to the recharge area of the aquifer. So all that is being polluted. So we have a lot of problems there that we still need to study and to understand better and to address better. So I guess that the main question here is for us that there is the need to focus attention on how to better regulate a threatened, vulnerable, and somewhat misunderstood resource. So that is another layer of complexity of our research. So mainly, as I said, what we wanted to look at in particular are like, what are the core drivers motivating the adoption and implementation of policy and law designed to promote sustainability in the use of groundwater. So we were, okay, let's try to see if we can find how and what and which drivers and how is all this coming together in order to promote sustainability in groundwater. So what we did is we conducted different case studies, as I say, in 2 different countries with 2 different characteristics. And what we wanted to look is at, okay, what are the different drivers motivating the adoption and implementation of policy and law? But also we wanted to tell the stories, as I said, not just for the countries at the government level or at the formal level of how the laws are being drafted, but also how the communities at the very local level are struggling with and what are they doing. So we wanted to tell these stories from Australia, which is a country that has fashioned cutting-edge laws to address groundwater use. Australia has been working on a water reform for the last 30 years. So it has been very interesting to look at all the different ways that they have now to protect and better regulate water, and in particular groundwater. They have done a lot in that. So that was a very interesting case to look at how or what are the measures to protect groundwater. And then we also decided to compare Australia with another country, which is Costa Rica, that is more a country that has been struggling with designing of policy and law, particularly in water. However, at the same time is is worldwide known for as an environmental leader in the region, in the Americas, but also have often struggling with the limited resources and weak institutions. So we wanted to see, okay, how all this come together, like as I said, the role of the government, but at the same time, the role of communities, that they are the ones using, in the end, groundwater, and how or what are they also doing along with these policies to promote sustainability in groundwater use. And finally, a very important aspect why these two countries were interesting to study was because both have the common aim to achieve sustainability, to promote sustainability. So they have recognized that in international law, and also in international treaties that both countries have signed, and also in their own countries, where they have ratified and implemented laws to promote sustainability. Okay, this is a very, let's say, a broad overview of the cases. So as I say, 2 in each country. So in Australia is a federal country, so it's divided by states. So we look at 2 different states. So when we talk about the law and policy approach in both of the case studies of Australia, in both of the states, in South Australia and in Western Australia, we saw that they have one defined water policy. So that is at the national level. So that is the Australian national policy. And also at the state level, each state has their own water law. And also at the very local level, both of these states, they have developed water allocation plans. So those are the legal figures in which they have said, okay, this is how much water you can take. And so there is some order there. So everybody knows that they are entitled to use this amount of water. Then on the other hand, we have Costa Rica, where we do not have a defined water policy. And the only water law that is there is from 1942, which was describing a country that doesn't exist anymore. So what it has happened is, like with many other different environmental laws, water now is regulated not only in this old water law, but in the next, I don't know, 25 or 30 or 50 environmental laws. So it's very hard to know how are you regulating, using, protecting water, because you have to go through many, many different laws. And then besides that, there are not water plans. So there's no water allocation plan. So you don't know how many people are using water and how much are they using. They just have permits. And in some cases, people don't even have the permit. They just use the water and that's it. So what we did, in order to understand, as I said, not only we did the policy and law analysis, we also wanted to see how people are struggling in their daily lives with all kinds of water problems, water pollution, water scarcity, how they are distributing water, what are the many different users and competing users dealing with each other. So we talked to different people there. So we talked with business, with irrigators, with farmers, with NGOs, with community-based organizations, with water boards. And then after that, we started, as I said, to really make sense, okay, this is what the law say, and this is what is actually happening, and try to understand a little bit of that mix. So just to give you a very brief overview of the context of each case study. In the first one, in Angas Bremer in South Australia, there is mainly a village that is the main people that are living in the village are farmers, are irrigators, and they were overusing groundwater. They were the same ones causing the problem because they didn't know how much water was there. They didn't know how much water they were using. They were just using and using. And at some point they realized, okay, we are just going deeper and deeper. We are drilling the wells deeper and deeper. And now we know that there is a problem. So then they involved the government, and then they started doing a lot of things that I will say later on. But that was a little bit of the context. And it was also an area that it was very much affected by climate change in the 80s and 90s. Then in southwest of Western Australia, that is also a very dry region. It's one of the driest regions in Australia. And they are being affected by climate change and also population growth, and also mining. They have a lot of mining around that. And there's a lot of people coming because of the mining development, so many different users. And as I say, climate change. However, interesting is to say that when we talk to all the different users, they said that they have never had a crisis of water. So they are not experiencing that crisis yet. However, some of the experts that we talked to from the government and from the universities, they were telling us, no, we are being monitoring this for the past 10 years, and now we can see that the water levels are starting to decrease. It's just that people are not feeling that yet, but it will happen soon. So it's interesting to see this, and well, I would think it would be very interesting to go back in a few years and see what is going on now. And then the cases of Costa Rica, one is in the north of the country, which is also like a very, very dry area. It's a coastal area. So it has been affected also by climate change, but mainly due to unplanned tourism. So it's a area full of very beautiful and white sand beaches and nice weather the whole year. So people can go on holidays like from January to December. So of course the government, from the central government, but also the local government, they have been promoting tourism. Unfortunately, this has been promoted without any sustainability plan, or without thinking, okay, where are the water resources? How much water do we have? How much water do we need? How much are we growing? How much? Nothing. So it has been just a little bit of unplanned. So of course now there has been a lot of problems due to water scarcity, especially in summers, that people cannot get access to water. So when I was doing interviews there, they were telling me, no, here, for example, in March, which is like the dry season there, they were opening the tap and they didn't have any water. However, if you were going around the whole area and you were going to the hotels, you will see that the hotels, they were having water, they were having the pool, the jacuzzi, the golf course were shining green and all beautiful. So then you think, okay, this is not a scarcity, this is more complex, this is more like distribution of water. Because obviously there is water, but who can access that water? Who has the technology to do the drilling of the wells? So that's also part of that discussion. And the last case is in the Caribbean. So that's an area that they don't have any kind of problems regarding water availability. There is a lot of water there and it rains like the whole year, a lot. However, we are having the problem there of agricultural plantation and chemicals, so all kind of pesticides, fungicides, and whatever you can imagine. So that is all being used like indiscriminately everywhere, even like with some of them having like little like planes and doing all the fumigation like around everybody, even schools, and well, there's a big problem there. So of course there are not just polluting the soil, but also the groundwater. And most of the communities there, they get their water from groundwater. So they are having now the water that they use to drinking water, they're having that water polluted. So that is, as I said, a brief overview. Maybe we can discuss a little bit more this in with the questions, but just to give now some of the main findings from each case study, and also to share some of the quotes that for me were some of the more interesting ones from the people that we interviewed there. And of course, thinking about how can we contribute to answer the question that we were posing at the beginning, and what are these key drivers of the adoption and implementation of policy and law to improve or to promote sustainability. So in the Ancas-Bremer, as I was saying before, they had a crisis, and everybody was very worried because they didn't, I mean, they never experienced that before. And then when they were in the middle of the crisis, they just said, okay, we need to do something. So I think in this case, it gives, in my opinion, a lot of hope, because you can see that now the community is so much better. And they started having this crisis, as I say, in the 80s, 90s. And then in the 2005, 10, they started doing much, much better. And then when I was doing interview there that I was doing from 2012 until 2014, they were just doing so much better now that you can see, I mean, sometimes you can really address the crisis and improve. So I think one of the main thing is, like, of course, when they realized all this, they took action and they did some changes. So some of the things that they did, as I said, the main thing was the crisis that sparked the community awareness. So then after the awareness, they started doing some changes. So for example, they were telling me, like, before they used to have like very water intensive crops, for example, lucerne, and after that they say, no, now we're going to have wine grapes. So that's a photo of the vineyards that they have now. And actually now they have become a very good, a very well-known wine region in Australia. So all this started because of a water crisis. So there are ways to, as I said, to address crisis and to do better. So they started using more water efficient crops. Then they also said, okay, now we realize that in order to have the recharge of the aquifers doing better, we need to have revegetation areas. So if you look at the picture at the very end, you can see some trees. So they started doing that. And they also said, okay, no, we need to do more monitoring. So they understand, okay, we cannot use as much as we want. We need to see how much are we using. First, what is the recharge capacity of the aquifer, and then use less than that, and then share with all of us to have some information and see if somebody's using less, to tell them not to do it or to go to the government. So they also involve the government. And interesting enough, then after all this happened, they made new statutory water allocation plans. And in these new statutory water allocation plans, they made as a requirement to get the water licenses, to have the yearly monitoring and reporting, to have the revegetation areas, and to have these different crops that they were more water efficient. Okay, in the second case study, it was interesting in the sense that, as I said, even though the experts were telling me that yes, water resources, groundwater resources are being affected and the water tables are decreasing, nobody has suffered the crisis yet. So it was interesting to see that shaped a lot of the responses in everything, in action, in practices, in innovation, in organization of the community. So for example, in the other case, in Ancas-Bremer, they created a committee, and that was the one that it was going to the government, and they were asking for meetings. So there was a better social organization here in this area. Even though we talked to some of the leaders, they told us, like, no, we haven't created any kind of this kind of committee, and we are still doing planning. So they have these water allocation plans too. However, interesting enough is to say that they are not statutory. So that means that if somebody is not complying with this, there are not sanctions for that. So if they use more, nothing really happens. So what they are doing at the moment, because some people are already started to get worried, they are trying to talk and discuss about improving these water allocation plans and have a statutory water allocation plans as they did in South Australia. So at the moment, there are these current discussions about water reform in the southwest of Western Australia, actually in the whole state. They are not having statutory planning. So all of them, they are not statutory. So they're having the discussion to move towards statutory planning. And now to change the context and go to Costa Rica, as I was saying, sorry, Jorge, what?
No, if you can, sum up because we have time for the questions later.
Yes, no, I have 5 minutes. I'm just wrapping this in 2 minutes in this one and 2 minutes in the last one. And yes, so as I said here in Costa Rica, the main problem has been the tourism in recent decades. And of course that came with water shortages. They also started having saline intrusion. They're having, because of the construction of the hotel, mangrove destruction, erosion, deforestation, and also climate change is affecting. So again, a lot of problems. So also the communities were looking at the laws to try to see, okay, maybe this can help us. But in the end, they were the asadas, who are the water boards, that they were worried about the situation and they took the leadership. So they went to the different institutions and started putting or presenting some claims and say, okay, there is deforestation here, there is problems here, you have to help us with all this. However, unfortunately, and it's not a lack of law, I want to say, even though, as I said, the water law is very bad. If you go to all the laws, they are clearly regulations against environmental destruction and about deforestation. You cannot change the land use. For example, the forests, they cannot be changed and made into hotels. However, that is happening. And as I said, some of the leaders there, like the asadas, the water boards, they are trying to do that and they have presented a lot of claims. However, for now, they have had only a very poor institutional response to all the problems. And finally, in the Caribbean, the situation has been even worse because, as I said here, the problem is the pollution. So these people have had all the water polluted. So, and the main economic activity that is doing that, even though I say like plantations, all kind of agricultural plantation, the main problem now is the pineapple. So I just want to highlight that. And they have created like huge environmental degradation and water pollution. And again, it was like in the other case, the community organized themselves. And this one have been more vocal than the other one, I guess, because also the problems have been much worse, even though in the other ones, they have a lot of problems. In this one has been somehow worse. So they have taken many of these pineapple plantations to court and they have won some of the environmental suits. So some of these plantations, they have been forced to leave, to stop the plantation. So that has been good and that has been another use of all these instruments. And the main thing that they have been using is we want a sustainable development, and this is not sustainable development, and we want water protection. And so that is just to sum up this, and just like 1 minute more for the conclusions, I think, just to try to answer the question that we posed at the beginning. So the key drivers facilitating the adoption and implementation of policy and law and regulation, as I said, also in the water allocation plans, were water crisis, that somehow that was related to increasing the awareness of communities. And of course, this was this was coming together with people getting information, learning, monitoring, having dialogues with government institutions. That's as it was clear in one of the cases with Australia. Unfortunately, not so much in the cases in Costa Rica. So leadership to foster minimum participation, as I said, in some of the cases in Costa Rica, these leaders like the water boards and other environmental organizations have been at the forefront of putting all these environmental suits. And in the case of Australia, we also found government research and funding in trying to understand the complexities of groundwater. And yeah, finally, I just want to pose this question to our discussion. So I think it's very important to rethink who is using groundwater. But as I said, not only who, but how much are they using and for what purposes? Because yeah, we know groundwater extraction is increasing every year, but that doesn't mean that more people necessarily mean that more people are getting it. Some people are still not having it, even though we are overexploiting the resource in many places around the world. So also we need to rethink about groundwater governance more general and rethink about investment, development, information, research, awareness. And yeah, finally, how all these link with broader topics like inclusiveness, justice, and well-being. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Gabriela. Let me stop the recording.